As the world celebrates International Day of Sign Language in what is also International Week of the Deaf, here on Morning Rush, we break the silence. This year, the theme for International Week of the Deaf is building inclusive communities for all. So is Zimbabwe doing enough?
Zimbabwe is obligated to facilitate the learning of sign language and promote the linguistic identity of the deaf community in line with the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. The convention recognizes and promotes the use of sign language, which makes it clear that they are equal in status to spoken languages.
Now, why are we highlighting this? Well, there are more than 70 million deaf people worldwide, according to the World Federation of the Deaf. And from that number, more than 80% of them are said to be living in developing countries.
Now, joining us here on Morning Rush, we have Barbra Nyangirai, who is the director of the Deaf Zimbabwe Trust. Barbra, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you and good morning.
Good morning to you. Now, this is a very special day. And when you came and you're like, I'm so happy to be celebrating this special day. But just help us understand the significance of it. Why is it such a special day?
It's a very special day for us as a country, but for the deaf communities at large, especially in Zimbabwe, because Zimbabwe is one of the few countries that have legal recognition of sign language. Other countries are still struggling to have sign language in their constitution, but here we are, 2013, which is 10 years ago, 9 years ago, we actually had legal recognition of sign language, which is a huge, huge step for the country. And in line with the CRPD, which you've just been quoting, it's very important because the silence was too much for the deaf community. There was no linguistic rights, they were not recognized anywhere, and there was no enforcement of the provision of sign language for them anyway. Think about it in families, as you go to service providers, even in our community activities, our churches, there was no sign language there. And so that meant that the exclusion and the marginalization was too much for the deaf community in our country.
No, so so it's legally recognized. But as a country, do you think that we've done enough to promote the learning of sign language?
I think incrementally we are doing all right. More can be done. The progressive realization of that right we are seeing. There's more sign language, even ZTN actually has sign language interpretation here and there. The problem is the frequency and how much of sign language is actually provided and access to content. But as a country, I think we are making the necessary steps. We have developed a sign language for a syllabus for primary school. We are yet to work on the secondary school one. And so we are making progress, but more can be done.
Okay, well, so now donor funding in developing countries is generally declining for a lot of sectors. What alternative approaches can organizations that support the deaf take to ensure to sustain their activities in light of the dwindling donor resources?
I think there's a lot of potential working with government, because one of the things that government needs to do is they are the major service provider. They are the biggest employer. And if they are to provide sign language interpreters in our hospitals, in our police stations, in all the service delivery aspects, then the need to provide, maybe costed services by persons or by organizations will reduce. So I actually think working also with the private sector is a huge, potential and opportunity that is there. So there's lots that can be done in that space.
That's wonderful. Now, we're living in a world that is progressively moving very fast in terms of communication and technology. Is this beneficial? Has this benefited the deaf?
Absolutely. The change in ICTs, the progression has been very beneficial. Look at Skype, WhatsApp, video calling. That has made a huge difference for the deaf community, particularly in the past when we had SMS only or call. There was not much alternative for them to communicate. But right now there's video calling, there's Skype, there's Zoom. So inclusion is actually made better by improved technology.
Now, while we are moving forward and we are making these great strides, there are areas that still need improvement. Maybe you could just highlight one or two of those areas and why we should be focusing on ensuring that these are addressed.
I think it's in education. We still don't have sign language interpretation in our schools. Our deaf children, in the majority of cases, just being babysat. The teacher does not know how to communicate with them in sign language. The lack of the syllabi throughout the curriculum has meant that access to content, access to the curriculum is very limited for the deaf children in our schools. And what that means is that they will lag behind in terms of educational outcomes and opportunities for employment in the future.
Now, of course, you mentioned this with schools, but also with the communities themselves. While, like you've said, it's now recognized as a legal language, but the communities themselves were coming from a background of not all of us had access to learning how to sign. Not all of us had access to learning how to communicate with people who cannot hear us. And what happens is, especially among the younger children, because they're not taught, there is a lot of stigmatization, and kids can be mean.
Absolutely.
Kids can be mean without even meaning to be mean. How do we as the community start to change the way we communicate with the deaf, but also communicate with ourselves to be able to accommodate them in our societies, because they are part of us?
I think it starts with the family. Many people who are deaf are born to hearing families who do not make an effort to learn sign language. You'd be surprised how many requests we have by parents to teach their daughters about boys. And I'm like, that's the role of the family. You are the mother, you are the guardian. That's your place. So the starting point is the family. When families give priority and importance to their children who are deaf, communities copy what families do. When we look like we don't care, we're not really concerned about their future or even about them, the community just takes on, it mirrors what we do. So I think it starts at the family, the importance of children who are deaf and hard of hearing, or just all children in general. And then also we need to move away from the witchcraft discourse. That has really put a dent on the manner in which the families receive their children with disabilities. And so those are some of the things that we need to change. At community level, disability awareness, understanding that diversity is a part of us and nobody caused it. I think in the majority of cases, the blame game, who did what, who caused what, and that in itself, derails the progression of acceptance and better protection for children with disabilities in our families.
Good. Now, I like what you said when you said families who have the deaf in them are not making an effort to go and learn the sign language. How can where do I go? If I want to learn sign, I don't have anyone deaf, but if I want to learn how to sign language, where do I do this? Internet, or where?
There are many opportunities for learning sign language. Organizations that are for the deaf in Zimbabwe also provide sign language. Deaf Zimbabwe Trust has actually, because of COVID-19, we introduced online classes for sign language, and then with a few face-to-face interactions. So that in itself, there are many opportunities to learn sign language in our country.
That's really good. Can you show us a sign and say hello, good morning?
Hello, good morning, everyone.
Oh, love it. Now, Barbra, just before we let you go, just also give us a little bit of more insight into the Deaf Zimbabwe Trust, just so we understand what your role is, especially when working with communities that have, in communities in general, and also where to find you.
Our work has been for the promotion of sign language development, documentation, and description of sign language in Zimbabwe. We've also been focusing on deaf education, access to higher education, and over the years, I must say that we are going to be celebrating 10 years next year.
Wow.
And we have seen more deaf people train as social workers, a first in the country. We now have young deaf people training as journalists at Harare Polytechnic. We are seeing progress for the deaf, because when you're looking at even in the disability sector, there were hierarchies. There were some that are more important than others, and the deaf community were at the lowest rung, of that ladder. And so we are saying that we need equality in all spaces, in all spheres. So that's been our work. We're found in Greendale at number 12 Victory Avenue. And feel free to join us for the celebrations today.
Oh, absolutely. Now, just in conclusion, do you have a message for the communities out there? And preferably, we'd actually like you to sign the message.
All right, thank you. I'd like to say Happy International Day of Sign Languages to everyone. We hope that everyone learns sign language to build inclusive communities.
Wow, that's
That is
amazing.
brilliant.
I'm coming for lessons. I really would love to learn that. Now, of course, as I mentioned, if you would like to get involved in the celebrations or even just learning how to sign, then you definitely can look up the Deaf Zimbabwe Trust. They also have, you also can find them on social media, so just look for them there and get in touch with them, see how you can become involved in creating a better and more inclusive community for everybody involved.